Hi, friends. Welcome to the Genesis of Shame podcast. I'm your host, Sam Landa, and I'm here to help you speak biblical truth to the shame you experience in relationships. My hope is that you grow in your understanding of how shame impacts you so you can learn how to connect with God and others. If you've experienced fear, hiding who you are, boundary issues, anxiety, and/or depression in your relationships, then this podcast is for you. It's time to speak truth to your shame. Well, all right, everyone. Welcome back to the Genesis of Shame podcast. This is the next episode on church abuse. And today we are talking about a very important part of church abuse, which is how to identify the abusers. We'll talk about their upbringing, behavioral patterns, and church situations in which the abusers seem to thrive or look for. So hopefully this is a very helpful discussion. And as you listen and as you this whole series in general, I mean, because it's such a difficult and controversial topic, and because I know there's a lot of people who are listening who may have experienced some type of abuse at some point within the church, I think it's important that we, or as I describe these characteristics today, that you piece everything together and try to use wisdom and discernment as we walk through many of these male to female relationships, because I think the tendency after listening to an episode like today's is to go into all of your relationships of opposite sex and try to figure all of these things out, right? Especially, again, if this has happened to you before. If you've been abused, again, that can be spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically, sexually. I mean, so many different ways in which abuse has crept into the church that it just needs to be addressed. So like I said before, this is a very difficult discussion, but a very necessary one. So if you missed last week's episode, feel free to click on that one. That was episode 42, and basically it was an introduction to church abuse. So today we're going to talk about identifying abusers, and there's a lot of pieces that go into this, so make sure you stay to the end and get each of these pieces together so you can come up with a better understanding of how they operate and what it looks like within the church. Okay, and again, if this is your first time listening, thank you for tuning in, and remember to hit that subscribe button, and hopefully you can get all the future episodes when they are released. If you've already been listening for quite a while, thank you for your support. I really appreciate it. I mean, I just love getting not emails as much, mostly messages through Facebook or Instagram, where you guys just kind of share some thoughts or have questions. I just love that. So if you have any of those, please send them my way. Again, because this is a controversial topic, or a topic that's very triggering, I know that you may have some questions, so you can email them to me. You can message me through Facebook or Instagram, and I will hope to address them throughout the week. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into today's topic. The topic is identifying abusers' upbringing. So we're going to look at what that looks like for them, behavioral patterns, and church situations. So when we think about abusers, one of the common themes in each and every situation, there's this desire for power and control in relationships, and this is what drives them to do what they do when they enter a relationship where they feel stronger or they want to dominate the other person. Obviously, in this case, we're talking specifically about their desire to dominate women, or to lord over them, or to make them feel guilty, to gaslight them, to eventually end up sexually abusing them. Again, we're going to look at characteristics, my hope is that you're able to piece all of this together, or that you choose to piece all of this together, because it's very easy to look at one part of this and then identify or try to identify an abuser and just go off of that. But you need each of these things, each of these elements, which is the history, the relational characteristics, which are the behavior patterns, and then the church situations, okay, or relational situations. So let's look at a couple of things first from the upbringing and history of a person who tends to be abusive. Okay. Before going into that, because we are talking within the context of the church, I think it's very important to kind of outline what it typically looks like, this idea of abuse, because what you will not see immediately is sexual and physical abuse. And what I mean by that is when you look at situations of abuse within the church, before it gets to the sexual or the physical abuse, there's always these other elements of abuse. So there's the emotional, there's the spiritual, there's the mental aspects of abuse. So what I mean by that is that if someone is being physically abused or sexually abused, it's highly likely that they have already been spiritually, emotionally, or mentally abused. So these are the warning signs. So before it gets to the physical and the sexual, hopefully the content that you hear today is able to kind of provide a diagram of some sort, or a guide where if you are experiencing these things in a relationship, you can stop it before it gets to that point. Because once it gets to the emotional aspect, it's very hard to stop it there, right? So when someone is being emotionally abusive, controlling your emotions through manipulation, through gaslighting, name calling, whatever the case is, making you feel guilty about your faith in God because there are these they have these God-given positions in their eyes, right? But they're abusing that position, abusing that power. It's very easy to make one feel guilty for what they're thinking or what they're believing. So again, as we look at this, we're going to piece all these things together, and hopefully I'm able to package it nicely for you guys at the end so you can see what this looks like. So again, let's go ahead and look at the upbringing and history. So I mentioned power and control. So you could imagine that someone who has issues with power and control likely didn't have power or control when they were younger. So a lot of childhood trauma that you see in their backstory, it has to do with power and control, either too much of it or the lack of it. So what you'll often find is abuse tends to be repetitive. It tends to be generational. Now, that doesn't mean that if someone has experienced abuse, any of the types that I mentioned, that they themselves will become abusive, but it is something to look at. Okay, so if you're dating right now and you guys are starting to get to know each other and you know about abuse in this person's past, it's important to start just paying attention to things that they do and see if they're repeating the same mistake of their parents, whoever the parent is that is abusive. Typically it's the father. Again, especially if it's verbal or emotional types of abuse, but it can be the mother as well. Mothers can also be very manipulative and shaming, so they also use their words to cut their children down. Again, it's just something to pay attention to. This doesn't mean that the person that you're seeing is going to do these things. It just means that it's something to be mindful of. Okay, so what you'll find, like I said, is that there's either the lack of control or lack of power in situations. So, for example, in divorce, when parents get divorced, the children really have no say in that process. So when there is that situation where there was no power to say anything, again, power either through word or through action, what they said didn't matter, or they couldn't just do anything about keeping their parents together, they feel powerless. So anytime they enter relationships where they have some power, they may not know how to handle it well. In doing so, they may try to assert themselves a little bit more because they get scared when they don't have power. They freak out or they become very anxious, so they have to take control of a situation. So that's often what you'll find. Other times it's when they themselves have no power. So I've worked with a lot of clients who were physically or sexually abused by a family member or by a close friend, and the person was bigger and stronger than them, and they're almost shaming themselves because they say that I should have done something. And you wonder, like, what could you have done? I mean, this person is someone that you trusted, or someone that you should have trusted, because family members were supposed to trust them, or close friends were supposed to trust them. But if they use that trust to abuse us, then that's not a healthy relationship, right? But we don't know that as children when those things are happening to you. Like, something's off, but because that person is supposed to be trustworthy, there's this cognitive dissonance that's happening, right? Like, this situation doesn't make any sense. Why is this person that I trust and love and care for doing this to me, right? So there's a lot of confusion there, not knowing the power dynamics of that situation. And now as they get older, they look back at that situation and said, I should have done something, right? So now when they do experience power, or do feel like they're not in control, they do everything they can to try to maintain more control of that situation or that relationship, right? So abusers, what happens is that they fear not being in control. They fear not having power. So the way that they do that is they kind of ease into it through spiritual abuse, so kind of shaming you in your relationship with God. But more specifically, what they do is they tend to justify their actions, their negative behaviors. So maybe they are mistreating you, maybe they're calling you names, maybe they're saying how you're slandering a man or woman of God. And they'll use that to make you question whether or not you're in the wrong, right? Even though what they're doing is clearly wrong, even by especially by the standards of the scriptures. And you see it and you realize that what they're doing, it just doesn't make any sense biblically, and you're confused because they're supposed to be an authority. So there's some conflict there, right? Some internal conflict going on. So the shame comes from, here's a person I'm supposed to admire, and I see what they're doing is wrong, but they're telling me that I'm wrong. Maybe it's how I perceive it. If you're younger in the faith, you might question it even more, right? If you grew up in the church and these are people that you've known for a long time, you might question that as well. Like, am I just not seeing something right? Like, what is it that I'm not seeing that they're seeing? So that's one way in which spiritual abuse can take place. Emotional abuse is more about manipulation, right? If you don't do X, then I won't do Y, right? So if you speak evil of me, then I don't want anything to do with you. And it might not be speaking evil, you're just calling something out. You're saying, hey, what you did or what you said hurt me, let's fix this. And the person doesn't want anything to do with it. Or they might just brush it under the rug and never address it again, right? They pull away from the relationship. They start talking bad about you to other people that they know, right? To damage your reputation or talk bad about you and put you in a negative light. So those are different ways of manipulating a relationship. So again, everything that they do is really due to the lack of power or control over a relationship. Typically, they'll tend to remove themselves from a relationship where they can't gain any power and control. And typically the person who's able to do that is someone who's more secure, who's maybe more assertive, who has a very clear identity in Christ. They know who they are in Christ. So those are people that they'll probably stay away from. The ones that they're looking for are typically insecure believers or new believers, right? People who are new in the faith. Again, because we're talking about the power dynamic here between a leader, pastor within the church, and then a member from the church, these are the things that you'll likely see or know about their past. And this is especially true in adolescent years. Sometimes bullying becomes a big part of this. Again, they don't know how to cope with that. If that's all they've ever seen, if that's all they've ever known, their way of relating could be one way or the other. Either they hated how they were treated and they do their very best to not do that in relationships, or because it's all that they've seen, they just operate by what they have seen, right, in relationships, and they look at what works and what didn't work. Did the person eventually get what they wanted, right? So if they're looking at someone in high school or middle school and they use these manipulative ways to dominate people or have control over people, and it worked, then they'll likely do the same thing. But that is part of the upbringing with abusers. Okay, again, this is just one part. Now let's look at the second part, which has to do with how they relate. What are some characteristics, some personality characteristics in here, but more so, what does a person who's an abuser, what do they look like? And more often than not, one of the things that I've seen in with abusers, they're very charismatic, very good with words. So you will see a male figure, leader in the church who will use that to their advantage. They're very charismatic. They use their words. They will compliment the woman often, and they will say things about first about maybe personality, and then they'll start commenting on the body, maybe even getting to the point of being inappropriate. And at first they may play it off as being playful and it's not a big deal, but with time it gets more and more aggressive. And if they see that the person is accepting of it, they will continue to push those limits. Okay, this is how they operate. They start pushing these limits little by little. And again, it doesn't come off as creepy. I think sometimes we have this perception in our mind that abusers will be creepy. But again, because they're charismatic, because they're good with their words, it's not going to come off that way. So, just something to pay attention to when you are relating to other men within the church. Again, I don't want you to go back to your church or any male-female relationships and start questioning everything. Is just awareness. Again, the whole thing with this is about awareness of self and awareness of the other person. How are you feeling throughout this process? And usually what you'll find is, I felt uncomfortable when they said that. I felt something was off. I felt like that wasn't appropriate for him to say, right? So that's what you'll hear, but it wasn't a big deal. Followed by, but it wasn't a big deal. So those are just some things to be mindful of. Another thing is, as they start building this rapport with the female, one of the things that they're going to do is they're going to start to gather information, very specific, detailed information about your life. Again, not creepy at all. It's not going to come off like, this, sneaky guy just trying to, who's looking around the corner at you and trying to gather information while they're taking notes there. This is a person who's very intentional, and they're asking questions about your daily life, about your daily schedule, that makes them more aware of what you do and how you do it. Okay. So you'll see that this is very specific information that they're looking for. If you are single, they're looking for what your schedule looks like, where you hang out, who your friends are. They might even start hanging around your friends a lot more and trying to gather rapport there so that they like them, so that your friends can like them as well. So there's a lot going on there. Okay. But the information gathering is important. If a person is married, they'll gather information about not just your schedule, but your spouse's schedule, the husband, your kid's schedule, if you have kids. And basically what they're trying to do is find openings that you get where you guys can spend together, where you can meet up, right? Or where they can start looking for opportunities to see you, okay? So those are things that you need to be mindful of. They're going to start getting very specific information about you. Once they've established rapport, slowly but surely, you're going to start to notice some gaslighting or some manipulation, right? And when this happens, that's when you really need to pay attention. That's when you really need to put on those headlights and look at the sign that's in front of you that says, turn around. This is a dangerous zone. Okay. And again, for those of you who are listening and who have experienced this and this is resonating with you, I'm not sharing this to shame you. This is something that you might be agreeing with and saying, yeah, I saw those signs. I wish I would have listened to them before. When I saw them, this is very helpful information. And please, if you have and you have more signs, just send them my way, and I can post those for others to learn about as well. But these are some of the things that I hear often, right? I saw the signs and I knew something was off, but I didn't think much of it. But if you're here, once the person becomes manipulative and they have no significant role in your life other than being either a church leader or a pastor, typically you'll see it. But if you're emotionally involved, if they've already won you over with the first impressions, right? Then it's harder to make those judgment calls. That's why it's so important to have people around you who love you and care about you and know what's going on in your life, this solid Christian community, so it can help you see, hey, there's something off here, and they can help you throughout the process to develop some discernment. But one of the things, I think I was talking with a friend, actually this week, we were talking about how one of the reasons why I think this has continued to grow within the church is because we're so afraid to confront each other and to question each other. And when that happens, we don't know anything that's going on in our own lives. So one person doesn't feel like they need to share anything, and the other friend doesn't feel like they need to ask anything, right? And we just don't want to step on each other's toes. But this is something that needs to be done, especially since it's growing so much within the church. Actually, let me read off a couple of stats here. From the Department of Justice, 3 out of 4 female adult victims knew their offender, and this is very, very common, right? That most of the time the offender is going to be someone that right? And that's kind of scary again, because the people that you tend to trust, right? Also from the CDC, 1 out of 3 women and 1 out of 4 men have experienced sexual violence involving physical contact at some point in their lives. And that is from the CDC. This one I knew, and this one's a really sad one actually, because it starts so young. So 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men are sexually abused before they turn 18. So just imagine that, a quarter and about a 13% or so of people are sexually abused before they turn 18. That's a really, really sad statistic. So information gathering, gaslighting, manipulation, shaming, and obviously one that's going to sound obvious, but when they become controlling, right? So why are you doing that? You shouldn't be doing that, and give me this and give me that. And again, all of this because of the information that they've gathered. Now they have control because they start blackmailing you, right? There's this emotional type of blackmail where because you've given them so much personal information, they're going to use that against you. They are going to use every piece of information that you've given them against you. So if you share something that you've struggled with in the past, excuse me, I've been wrestling with some sort of cold. If you share something that you've struggled with in the past or something that you're currently struggling with, trust me, they will use that to gain leverage in your life. They want control. They want power over you. And it becomes very apparent, again, once they start manipulating, gaslighting, shaming, and especially when they become very direct with their version of control. Okay? And their version of control is, let me know what you're doing at every instant of every day of your life, right? That is what you're going to start seeing. And once it's there, it is a dangerous place to be, because now they have so much. Again, by this time, they've already probably made you question your faith. They've already been gaslighting you. So there's emotional abuse there. There's the mental abuse, which is making you question everything, seem crazy. Everything is your fault, right? There's all of that. And then you have that red flag, that big red flag. Can this enter into physical and sexual abuse? Again, this can happen within any time range. There is no time range for this. Like, I can't say within 3 to 6 months this is going to happen. These people are patients. Again, these are wolves in sheep's clothing. And this is what the church needs to worry about. right? We need to protect the flock. And this is where all brothers and sisters are aware of this. And when they see this happening, they point this out and we're able to protect each other. So, again, wolves in sheep's clothing, they don't care. They will take whatever time is necessary to gain control and power over your life. Okay. So this is happening at the interpersonal level, but there's one more situation that if all of these three line up, then you need to get out of this. I mean, you should already get out of this if these things have been happening already. So if there's a relationship in your life right now where all of these things, the upbringing and history, these relational characteristics are in place, you see the manipulation, you see the information gathering, the gaslighting, the gossip, the controlling, it's a red flag already. It's a red light. You need to turn around and pull out of that relationship. Okay. But for those who don't, what you find is the next situational characteristics that make it very easy for the last two steps, which are physical abuse and or sexual abuse. And these are the situational characteristics, or what I call here the church situations, where it becomes dangerous. So what's happening? Again, if typically, because it's a leader, they might be married. If it's a pastor, might be married. Most likely they are. And then the person in which they're preying on is also in a relationship or they're married, right? So what you'll find, and this from the SBC report and a couple of other reports that they have printed out, is that there's always some sort of marital issues going on between the husband and the wife, both with the pastor and also with the victim. There's always some sort of turmoil going on at home. So they find comfort in each other, and they find like they understand each other, and there's this mutual understanding and this mutual love and this mutual affection, right? So all of these things are starting to sprout from this situation. Now, again, sometimes these relationships turn sexual and physical because they've just developed a sense of closeness, right? So when that's happening, even the victim feels ashamed, right? So they don't really have much to say over that situation. At least that's how they feel. Like, I can't really say anything because I've allowed myself to get to this point where I've participated in this. So there's this shame that comes over them, and they feel like they can't speak up because they feel in some way they participated in it. And, in some instances that is the case. In other instances, it's not, right? It's clear manipulation, clear gaslighting, clear emotional abuse by the leader or pastor. Okay, so again, these are some things to pay attention to. So if you're experiencing relational issues, this person is not the person to confide in. Okay, again, you have female friends. For those who are male, you have male friends. You have other leaders that you can share with, but not with this person where there is a power differential. And again, in every single one of these situations, there will always be a power differential. Okay, so again, the person is either going to be a church leader or a pastor, and then the other person, a church member. That, again, power differential will always be evident in instances of abuse. Okay, so the person will always be in a position of authority. So, two situational characteristics: marital issues for both. Sometimes it's just one. Okay, not necessarily all the time both, but most likely it's both. One of the persons is always in a position of authority. Okay, and there is also a large amount of stress. And when there's large amounts of stress, what happens? The person wants to relieve that stress, and the only way to relieve that stress is by being in situations where they feel comfortable. And that can be being with this person. That can be having sexual relations with this person, right? And they do whatever is necessary to get the trust, to get that person to do what they want. All of that going back to the previous point about relational characteristics, building that person up, saying great things about them, both, their personality and physically, and then it gets a little uncomfortable. They start gathering information, manipulating them, right? So all of this builds up to these situations where they use it as leverage over the victim. Okay. And again, like I said in the previous statistic, it's always, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, it's often someone that you know. Okay. Again, because there's a high level of trust, it's likely someone that you know and someone that you know well. Again, these abusers aren't just in church leadership and pastors, but sometimes these are people in homes, right? I mean, I was reading one of the reports, and one girl was reporting how it was her father who was abusing her. And that was really sad to read, because I think they kind of suspected something but wasn't investigated. And it's really hard to tell, because you never want to assume something of a family. So it's hard. I know, I can see how that can be a little bit more complicated, but still we need to be aware of these signs, of what can happen in these situations. Okay. So I think I covered a lot of this. And I guess, one of the things actually that I did miss, and I think it's important to note here, is narcissism. Narcissism is another key element of abusers. They puff themselves up. They think that they're the greatest. And there's an air of arrogance about them, right? They seem to, because they know so much, or because they are so good with people or so charismatic, it's almost like they walk around with this sense of, it's not false confidence, but it's an arrogant type of confidence. So just be very mindful of that. They have a lot of yes men around them. They don't take criticism well. You don't feel close to them because they're not vulnerable. So these are some common characteristics of narcissists. So narcissists are some very key people to look at in situations of abuse. So if you have a sense that the person is a narcissist, and again, this means that they don't take criticism well, they think too highly of themselves, it's hard to feel close to them because they are not really vulnerable. Those are just some things to look at as well. And that comes up in situations, because you'll see that in meetings, you'll see it in interpersonal relationships, right? Just general, trying to get to know them. These things will come up and you will notice them. So if all of these factors are in play, then you can say, you know what, this is someone who can easily be someone that we need to take a look at, which could mean not allowing them to be back in the church, especially because they can be very dangerous. Again, the job for every person, but specifically for the pastor and for the church leaders, is to protect the flock. Okay, so, but even us as members of the church, we can protect our brothers and sisters in Christ. We have to protect them, right? Or our sisters in Christ in this case. We have to protect them. So if you see something and you know that it's off, again, as guys, we know guys. So you see things, speak up, ask, and see what can be done, right? Because we do need to clean and purify the church from these wolves in sheep's clothing. So again, guys, my hope is that you use this information wisely. And I don't want to make you paranoid of all of your male to female relationships. I just want for you to have this sense of awareness, right? Again, awareness of self and awareness of others. Okay, if you're aware of yourself and how you're feeling and what you're thinking and what you're experiencing, that's a really good start. And then, but also becoming aware of what's going on around you can also be very, very helpful. And I hope that this episode provided that. Again, as always, if you have any questions or comments or concerns, again, I research this stuff. I don't get to touch on everything that I want to touch on, but if you feel that there was something that I missed or something that I should have mentioned, please feel free to email me, message me, and I will be sure to address that in either the next episode or through some posts. But guys, thank you for tuning in. Again, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so. And if you can, leave a review. Those are really helpful for the podcast to get the word out and continuing to grow the audience. Well, thank you guys for your time. Hope you guys had a good one, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. Thank you again for tuning in today, guys. I really appreciate it. Your support means a lot to me, and I really look forward to doing these each and every week. If you would like to continue supporting the podcast, one of the things you can do is go to your Apple Podcast and find the Genesis of Shame there and then subscribe to it. That really helps it get some traction on the iTunes podcast and will allow this to be heard by many more people. You can also follow me on Spotify and other major podcast platforms. Thank you again, guys. Have a great day.